Welcome to Education News You Can Use. Thank you for joining us today. For those of you who are in our audience, for those of you who are listening at home, we're glad to have you with us for this podcast. My name is Vincenne Revilla, and I'll be your host. And we are broadcasting today from Paduti Podcast Studio and Community Theater here in Tarentum, northeast of Pittsburgh, along the Allegheny River. And this is a beautiful facility, and we're so thankful to be here today. I am a teacher and researcher. I'm interested in all aspects of education and teaching and learning. But most of all, I'm very committed to the health, safety, and welfare of all students. And that has been my primary emphasis in all my decades to teaching. I'm also new to the podcast world, so this is very exciting. Education News You Can Use is going to look at best practices for teaching and learning, technology, AI, teacher shortages, high-impact teaching methods, and we're going to celebrate leaders in our field. There are so many educators doing wonderful things to reform education and to chart new territories. And we're going to have some fun along the way, too. Today, we're excited to welcome Dr. Christal Edmunds as our special guest. She is a Point Park University professor and early childhood educator, well known for her expertise. She had her own school, which is a remarkable feat. She's currently the board president of the Waldorf School, and she is known as an expert in Montessori education because of her certifications and experience. Welcome, Christal. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Vincenne. It's an honor to be here today.
How are you doing today?
Great.
Good,
really wonderful.
Good.
Thank you.
Before we dive into the interview, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in education and, some things that you've learned along the way as an educator.
Right. Well, maybe starting with why I'm a teacher.
Yes.
And when I knew I was called to be a teacher, I've known since I was in kindergarten that this was what I was supposed to do for my life work. And in saying that, it really is my passion. And I think it had a lot to do, too, with many early experiences that I had. I often share with my students these little anecdotes throughout my life and how those things really guided me. Very early on, I grew up in a regular suburban house, and I remember some of these experiences with my brothers and sisters. One in particular, we had come home from midnight mass. I was raised Catholic, came home from midnight mass, and I was maybe about 6 years old. And so it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and my sister said, "How about if we open our Christmas presents now?" And I looked at everybody and I said, "How is that possible? Santa Claus hasn't been here yet." And everybody laughed, because how foolish I was to still believe in Santa Claus. But I was only like 6 or 7. And the point behind this story is I remember feeling embarrassed and humiliated as a child for having this belief, having this idea of Santa. And unfortunately, that's how I found out that there wasn't a Santa Claus. But I remember as a child thinking that isn't right for somebody to do to a child, to make them feel that way, to be embarrassed, to be humiliated. And that, along with similar situations like that throughout my life, I remember thinking, this isn't right. I remember certain educational practices in classrooms that teachers would do and say things to children. I would think, oh, this isn't right. This isn't right. So I always had this very strong sense perhaps of justice, or this idea that children really should be treated differently. And so when I was in college, I went to Penn State undergrad. I was getting my degree in elementary education. I was in one of my classes, and one of my fellow friends in class, he had said that, he had read, he and I talked a little bit about what we believed about kids and how we thought education should be. And he said, "Oh, I just read this book by Maria Montessori." He said, "I think you'd be really interested in it." So I took that book. He loaned the book to me. I took the book, and she gave words to all of these feelings that I had about children. She talked about treating children with dignity and respect, and recognizing that children come into the world with a wealth of ability that we don't tap into. And so I was 19 years old, student at Penn State, looked in the phone book, because that's what you had to do back then, looked in the phone book and found that there was a small Montessori school right off of campus. And I walked 3 blocks off of campus, knocked on the door. Jeannie Mahoney opened the door of the school. And I told her my little story. I said, I've just read a little bit about Montessori. I want to learn more about this. And she welcomed me in. No clearances, no FBI clearances, none of that stuff that we expect students to have today to go and observe. And that was the first time I was in a Montessori classroom. And she welcomed me in, as I said, and I continued to do that for the next 3 years as a student at Penn State. I went and I opened the school for her in the morning. I was there until 11 o'clock, 11:30 every day, working with the children. And then I would go to campus in the afternoon. And it brought such a depth to my education and to my education courses, because I had this experience with children and I was seeing children learn in a different way, even than they were teaching me at the university, right? And I was that student raising their hand and challenging professors and things. So I tell this story to my students because I always tell them, I want you to challenge. I want you to raise your hand. I want you to question. And the truth behind this too is that there isn't just one answer. I mean, Montessori isn't the only answer. Throughout my career, my guiding question has been, what are we doing with young children? And is this the best that we could be doing for them and with them in terms of education? And so my path has taken me through, Montessori. I've spent a great deal of time there. Also, Waldorf education, as you mentioned in the introduction. I'm currently the board president at the Waldorf School of Pittsburgh. And that has been a dream come true because they invited me in a year ago. And I've been going to the Waldorf School weekly for the past year and almost a half. And I've been Miss Jill's assistant when I go. And so I'm learning from really from the ground up what that's all about. Although I've studied the philosophy of it for years and years, but I'm learning what it really means. And then also, of course, high scope. You and I at Point Park, we had our high scope school on campus for many years, and I was the faculty advisor for that school, and also spent a tremendous amount of time with those teachers and learned how they're doing things with children. And then, of course, Reggio Emilia, which is one of the more current approaches, and we have an excellent example of that here also in Pittsburgh that I've been fortunate enough to spend time in. So all this to say that there are so many different ways that we can be reaching children in holistic, joyful ways. And that's really what my career has been about.
You've had such an amazing career, Christal, and so many people know you and know your work. And, it's amazing as I listen to you recount from those early days, it's amazing that in our lifelong learning journey, whatever it may be for our listeners or our folks in our audience, you never know what instance is going to make an impact, like a friend sharing a book with you, and it opens doors and perspectives about things. Thank you for sharing so much of that. It's amazing.
Well, you're so right about those early experiences, because I think that that's part of what we're trying to do with young children, right? We're trying to create these really positive experiences for them that will fuel their lives. And we know that negative experiences can fuel that in a negative way, right? And we, through our work with youth mental health first aid, we know those staggering statistics, right? That so many kids, and I jotted a couple of these things down. Some of these statistics that we remember from the training, that 1 in 5 youth are diagnosed. 1 in 5 youth have a diagnosis of a mental health issue. And 1/2 of those people are diagnosed by the age of 14, and 33/4 are diagnosed by the time they're 27. And those are shocking numbers. And then we also know that something like 40% of young people, meaning teens and young adults, 40% are self-reporting anxiety and depression. And if they're self-reporting that, we know that there's a lot of people who are not, right? And where's this all coming from? And I believe that it is coming from negative early experiences that students are having, whether it be in their homes or in schools or wherever. I mean, when we were in England, we kept hearing this term of school trauma, which really, once again, it was almost like that Montessori example that I shared about some of those words that friend gave me in class, or that Montessori gave me, dignity and respect for children. This idea of school trauma has given me a definition for some of these things that we're seeing. I actually had a student in my office just 2 days ago who's going to be taking a leave from the university to check herself in to a mental health facility. And, we were trying to develop a plan for how she's going to complete her coursework. And these are not little fairy tale stories. I mean, these are real life, I think, pains and hurts that people have. And I think it's different. I mean, you and I have been at Point Park for a long time. I mean, 34 years on my end, 50 plus on your end. And there's something different now. I think things have shifted. And I see a lot of that in what we're doing, I think, in schools with kids. We have tremendous high stakes testing. There's so much stress and pressure on children. Curriculum has been pushed down. What used to be first grade, is now kindergarten, and almost sometimes even 4-year-old preschool, that we're expecting 4-year-olds to hold pencils and to do worksheets, when in fact they shouldn't be. That's not what we would call best practice or developmentally appropriate practice, right? And all of these things, I think, work to the detriment of our children. And all the more reason why we need to create teachers who are going to be passionate about developmentally appropriate practice and passionate about making sure that children have good quality experiences in their classrooms. I spend a lot of time in my classes, very little time lecturing, and a lot of time asking questions and giving them discussion prompts. And just the other day in class, we were talking about experiences that the kids had growing up, and everybody remembers that teacher who called somebody out in a negative way. Everybody remembers that teacher that turned them off to math or language arts because you were humiliated in class because you didn't have the right answer, or you weren't paying attention, or whatever. And then you also remember those teachers who were fabulous and who cared for you. But the interesting thing that students always report, and I think the research actually plays this out, is that the teachers who are remembered are those who you felt a connection to.
So true.
Those who cared for you, those who really believed in you as a person. And I think that that's what some of these models represent, these different models that I mentioned in the beginning, is that I think those teachers walk into the classroom because they've selected this alternative way to teach. There's a different maybe energy driving them, but I think that they walk into the classroom with a different kind of intentionality of how they're going to be with children, not even just work with children, but how you're going to be in the classroom. And, we talked about even, and I did a little example with students. I said, how does it feel if I'm standing over you? There's teachers who stand over you, but as a Montessori teacher, I sat on the floor with my children. And even your body position communicates what you believe. If you're up front lecturing, I remember Penn State, in a forum, there was a building called the Forum, and there would be 250 of us in a psych class, and the professor would be up front lecturing. That's so vastly different than if you're in a classroom and you're having a conversation and you're learning the same things potentially, but in a very different way.
Yeah. I know you're in a lot of schools every week because you go out to supervise our student teachers. What do you think are the biggest challenges facing teachers, students, and parents today?
Social media.
Why do you say
Well,
that?
I mean, without a doubt. I mean, that is, I think, one of our biggest issues right now is social media with kids and the idea of phones in classrooms. I mean, this is the hot discussion right now. Over the summer, I participated with about 200 plus educators in Pennsylvania, doing a book read of The Anxious Generation, which is a hot book right now. And, we were talking about how social media has affected the mental health of children, but how it's also affecting them really academically. And it's that whole anxiety piece in this too. And so that's been one of the big things I think that that we've seen and people are really, really struggling with.
Here's a kind of a funny question. If you had a magic wand, and I think you do have magic wands because you do so much, and you could change just one thing about the current educational system, what would it be and why?
Joy, bringing joy into the classroom for children and having teachers who can bring that joy to children, teachers who love what they do and love their children, because I think that is the magic wand. That is the healing that children need. Because I don't think it has, I think it has very little to do with, more rote learning or more worksheets or more curriculum or all of those things that we spend so much time on. It really is about the relationships that children experience in school. And that's what I see in so many of the places. And it really isn't just these 4 models of schools that I mentioned. I mean, I'm in many different public schools right now. I'm in 2 public schools right now in the South Hills, and I'm seeing tremendous joy. And that's something that I write on my evaluation. When I'm watching a student, I'm saying things like, you had tremendous eye contact with your students. You were connected. The children were smiling. They were engaged. That's what good teaching and learning is about. And you mentioned that I had a small school for a period of time. For 15 years, was a principal of a small school. I was one of the co-founders of the school. And we ran on a shoestring. I mean, we had, very limited budget. Teachers were essentially like missionaries. I mean, they made very little money, but that school was full of joy. And we made a lot out of very little because you had people who were deeply committed to this. And so I think that would be it.
Yeah. And in order for teachers to bring that joy, it takes a tremendous amount of energy and commitment and planning and engagement, high impact strategies to engage the students. But the other side of that coin that we see sometimes has to do with teachers getting burnt out.
Right.
What do you think teachers can do so that they can keep that positive momentum and yet take care of themselves as well? Because teaching is such a highly demanding job.
It is. Well, this is your area of expertise. Now we're traveling into yours, right? This idea of self-care. And what that means is that you really do have to take care of yourself so that you can do this work. And I think that surrounding yourself with like-minded people is very important too. I think that teachers get most burned out when they're in a school or with a group of people who are not like-minded with them. So I also tell our students, when you're interviewing for jobs, you are also interviewing the school. You're interviewing the school to make sure that you're going to be a fit, that they're going to have the same expectations that you have. And that's really important for that fit, because I think that that's how you do stay energized and focused on the mission of the school. And I think that that's why, honestly, some of these smaller schools, like the Montessori schools or the Waldorf School, you have to have a very sort of different kind of commitment to want to work somewhere like that, right? If you're stepping out of the mainstream. And so you're likely to have people who are able to maintain sort of that passion because they're with other like-minded people. But I think sometimes when you're in an enormous school and there's so many different personalities and ideas about how things should be done, that's where it can get really taxing. But I do tell our students too, I say, I tell them, it's your job. My job is to train you to be like a rebel, to go out to schools and change that, because I really do believe that as we get some of our newer teachers in there re-energized with these ideas about education, that we're really addressing children in a holistic, joyful way, that we can have an impact on all schools.
For parents who might be listening, oftentimes when we think about education, we think about the teacher and the students in the classroom. But parents or caregivers in many cases, because some children are not, in a home with their parents, but with caregivers, what advice would you give caregivers in supporting their children?
Right. Well, the same thing, to be engaged with their children, to maintain that joyful home experience as much as you can. But I think engagement is so important. I'm gonna share a little anecdote of something that I brought up in class not too long ago. I was out wandering, as I do often, and I was at one of the malls in Pittsburgh, and I happened to notice a young mom with her baby, and the mom was sitting on the edge of a fountain, and she was on her phone. And her baby was in stroller in the car seat attached to the stroller. And so the mom was turned like this, and the baby was about here. And the baby also, and he was probably, I would say, like 18 months old. I mean, around there. And he was in his car seat, and he was holding a tablet. So the mom was looking at her phone. The baby was looking at a tablet. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is awful. What an awful example of what that should be or what that could be, right? And so that's why I go back to the other question that you asked whenever I mentioned social media being the issue. I think that, parents or people in general, we're just so connected to our phones that we're forgetting that real life is going on around us. And so I think parents need to be engaged with their children. I think parents need to be reading. Parents need to be preserving this time in children's lives to make sure that they have a childhood, to give them opportunities to go outside and play unsupervised, right? To have that childhood. I mean, you and I, in our youth mental health training, whenever we do our introduction, we always talk about our little icebreaker for our students is, what was your favorite toy or game growing up? And you always say what, Vincenne?
Being outdoors.
Right.
Being down by the riverside.
Right. Being down by the river.
Dogs.
Right.
That's right.
By yourself, and your mom wasn't tagging along.
No.
But for children to have those kinds of opportunities, and, we have shifted so many things that we've created these children who are afraid. And we're seeing that. And that's what I mean. We're seeing these statistics later on when 40% of young adults, teens and young adults, 40% are self-reporting anxiety and depression. And I think that has a lot to do with it.
Well, I think we're both optimistic educators and change agents.
Yes.
We've been very active. So as kind of our way to end this on a positive note, given all that's happening right now, what do you see in your vision for the future of education?
I see, and as you ask me that question, I see my classroom full of young adults who are learning to be teachers, who are going to go out and make a tremendous impact on the next generation of children.
I love that.
Really, I do. because they understand what's at stake, and they also have that deep commitment to make a difference. I know our students at Point Park are those change agents. So,
well, Christal, I know you're an inspiration. You know, just working with you inspires me too. And, you know, we've done so many projects together. It's been such a joy to work with you over the years. Well, I think that's going to wrap up this episode of our podcast of education news you can use. I want to thank Dr. Edmunds for being here today. I also want to thank the producers at Paduti Podcast Studio and Community Theater here in Tarentum. They're a fabulous team, and they've made this podcast a wonderful experience. I hope you'll join us next time. Take care of yourself and those you love. That's goodbye for now. Thank you.
Hey everybody, this is Jeff, and I want to tell you about our brand new podcast theater. We love producing live events for you, and we built a space that's flexible for creators, and this space will grow as your show grows. And best of all, we have no hidden costs, no risks, no hidden fees or guaranteed minimums. Because when you book your show at Paduti, you will get ideas and feedback and suggestions on how to produce your show live for our stage. We're going to build you an event landing page and facilitate your ticket sales. We're going to produce the entire event for you, and we're going to give you the recording that you own the full rights to. We take no ownership over your content because your success is our success. If you sell tickets, it's simple. We split the sales 50-50. There's no minimum, no guarantees. Ask for Jeff when you contact us, and let's bring your show to our main stage, Paduti.com. Let's go.